Why was everyone laughing at her rifle? The whispers were soft, but in a place where silence was survival, even the faintest snicker felt like a blade. Specialist Ala Vance kept her eyes down as she crossed the gravel yard of forward operating base Kestrel, the sun hammering against her shoulders like it wanted to break her spine. Dust clung to her boots, her uniform, even to the breath in her lungs. The air smelled of hot steel, diesel, and the faint, acrid bite of gunpowder carried on the wind. A place where soldiers looked the same, moved the same, where conformity was stitched into every crease of the uniform. And yet, she didn't fit. It was the rifle that betrayed her. They called it the junker, the broken stick, a patchwork of scars and mismatched parts that looked like it had been pulled from a scrapyard. Fiberglass stock from a bygone era glued and bolted into a modern chassis, a barrel worn dull gray, a scope perched on uneven rings, one of them suspiciously civilian, a Frankenstein weapon in a world of polished, factory-fresh rifles. Soldiers mocked it in mutters they thought she couldn't hear, but she always heard, every laugh, every side glance, every dismissal. She never responded. She just carried it the way one carries a shadow. When she entered the barracks that first night, the laughter grew bolder. Corporal Thorne, barely out of training but already wearing arrogance like a second skin, leaned close to see. He expected a sleek, high-dollar weapon. Instead, he saw her rifle, its chipped green stock, the faint line of epoxy, the strange angles. He scoffed. "What in the world is that thing, Specialist? Did you win it at a county fair?" His friends chuckled, the sound like pebbles hitting tin. A lad didn't look at him. She touched the bolt, her thumb tracing the cold steel with a quiet reverence. "It works." Her voice was low, even, not defensive, not embarrassed, just fact. Thorne smirked, shook his head. "Sure it does. Just don't point it at anything important." The laughter followed him out of the bay, echoing behind him long after his presence was gone. She kept working. Bolt sliding, chamber closing, the rifle standing finally against her locker like a silent sentinel. Ugly, scarred, out of place, just like her. The next morning brought Colonel Hayes. He moved through the barracks like a storm front, his gaze sharp, his anger coiled, striking out at gig lines and dust on boots. When he saw her rifle, he stopped dead. His face tightened. "Specialist," he barked, not even bothering with her name. She stood at attention. "What is that abomination?" His voice cut like wire. "It's my rifle, sir." "That is not a rifle." He stepped closer, his gloved hand tracing the seam of epoxy where metal met wood. His lip curled. "This looks like something an insurgent would cobble together in a cave. A disgrace. Where is your issued weapon?" "In storage, sir. Per my transfer orders, I'm authorized to carry a personally calibrated system." Hayes snatched the data slate from her desk. His eyes scanned the authorization, paragraphs blacked out. High-level overrides he didn't recognize. He didn't like it. It reeked of politics, of favors. He tossed the slate back down, his voice dripping contempt. "Personally calibrated. This thing looks like it was calibrated with a hammer and a prayer. You will not disgrace my FOB with that scrap metal. Effective immediately, you are reassigned. Range duty. Permanent. You'll sweep brass and patch targets." "Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir." "Good, and keep that thing out of my armory. I don't want it contaminating real weapons." He turned sharply, boots striking the floor, leaving her standing in silence. The others didn't meet her eyes, but she felt them anyway. Pity, amusement, relief that it wasn't them. The quiet woman with the broken rifle was now officially cast to the edge of the base. The firing range was her new home. A barren stretch of earth, scorching sun overhead, dust curling in relentless waves. Here she swept brass casings by the thousand, patched ragged paper targets, reset steel plates. Soldiers came and went, shouting, laughing, complaining, firing their gleaming rifles. She became part of the landscape, invisible, a figure carrying fresh targets and empty buckets, her broom scratching the dirt. But she was watching, always. She watched the wind shift and curl down from the ridges. She studied how it bent grass, how it lifted grit in spirals, how it whispered along the valley floor. She watched the mirage shimmer in waves, rivers of distortion flowing across the range. She watched the sniper teams, their cocky swagger, their precision rifles. She saw the flinch before Sergeant Davis's trigger broke. She saw Jensen's breath held too long, his sight picture quivering with his heartbeat. They were good, but not masters. They fought the range. She listened, she learned, she absorbed. At night, when the barracks filled with the noise of movies and card games, a lass sat with her rifle, cleaning it with careful, almost surgical hands. A small, leather-bound notebook lay open beside her, filled not with memories but with numbers, wind speeds, temperature, pressure, drawings of the valley with arrows and notes. She recorded it all, built a map in her mind of every breath the earth exhaled here. The soldiers called her the Range Witch, muttered it under their breath when they saw her staring into the distance for an hour, scribbling in her notebook, talking to the wind. They thought it was madness. They didn't understand it was preparation. The rifle was never broken. It was tuned, calibrated, waiting. And so was she. But something else was waiting too. A storm she could not ignore. A test she could not avoid. The arrival of a general. The demonstration that would go wrong. And the moment her silence would end. For now she remained in her exile. Quiet, patient. A woman with a broken rifle sweeping brass in the heat. But there was something they hadn't seen yet, something she hadn't shown. Not until the wind and the range aligned. Not until the right moment came. Not until the world gave her no choice, but to reveal who she really was. What happens when the best shooters fail? When their million-dollar systems crumble under nothing more than the breath of the earth? That question hung in the air at FOB Kestrel the morning General Peters arrived. The base buzzed with nervous energy. Soldiers double-checked uniforms, officers rehearsed lines, vehicles gleamed under frantic scrubbing. Colonel Hayes moved like a man possessed, barking orders, brushing dust from boots that would be covered again in minutes. The general was only passing through, but appearances mattered, and Hayes wanted perfection. The showpiece was the range. The colonel had arranged a demonstration of a new marvel, the Automated Dynamic Targeting System, or ADTS. Armored silhouettes mounted on tracks, programmed to pop up for just seconds at extreme distances, simulating enemy snipers with brutal precision. It was meant to impress, to prove that Kestrel's marksmen could dominate the battlefield of tomorrow. Hayes had gambled his reputation on it. But the valley had other plans. The wind began shifting mid-morning. What had been a steady cross breeze turned treacherous, swirling, gusting, spinning grit into the eyes of the unprepared. The air shimmered with heat. Mirage lines danced like water, bending and warping every view through a scope. It was the kind of day shooters dreaded. The sniper team set up anyway, their state-of-the-art rifles gleaming in the sun, bipods dug into the earth. Sergeant Davis barked orders, his confidence louder than his fear. Corporal Thorne scurried alongside them, handing ammunition, smirking when his eyes flicked toward the woman sweeping brass at the edge of the range. Alaf felt the wind brushing her cheek, tugging at her sleeve. She watched the grass ripple, the dust spin, the valley breathe. She knew what was coming. "Target up, Sector 4, 1,500 yards," the call rang out. A silhouette appeared from behind a rock. Davis locked on instantly, breath held, finger tight on the trigger. The rifle boomed. The target dropped out of sight untouched. "Miss." The word cut sharper than the shot. Davis frowned, adjusted, tried again. Another miss. Then another. Corporal Jensen stepped up, his round striking nothing but dirt. The other two snipers fared no better. Round after round thundered downrange. Nothing connected. Behind them, General Peters stood silent, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. Hayes stood stiff beside him, sweat gathering at his collar, his jaw tight. Every miss drove the knife deeper. "This system's too unpredictable," Davis muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. "The gusts are impossible. Nobody can shoot in this." The words carried more weight than he realized. Nobody can shoot in this. For 20 minutes the firing line became a graveyard of failure. Dust rose, casings clinked, excuses piled up. Finally, Hayes raised a hand, his face pale. The demonstration was dead. Silence stretched. The general turned slightly, not angry, not impressed, simply disappointed. And that silence burned more than words ever could. From the shadows of the range shack, broom in hand, a lass spoke. Her voice was quiet, steady. "Permission to try, sir." Every head turned. The laugh came first, sharp and cruel. "Thorn, you, with that thing." He gestured toward her rifle leaning by the door, a Frankenstein relic against the wall. A ripple of chuckles followed. The absurdity was too much. The janitor of the range, the woman with the broken rifle. Colonel Hayes's face flushed dark. "Specialist, back to your duties. You are embarrassing this command." But Peters's voice cut across him, calm and decisive. "Let her shoot." The colonel froze. To refuse wasn't an option. His glare could have cut steel, but his words carried no power now. "Fine, one shot. Do not waste our time." Alan nodded once. No smile, no hesitation. She picked up her rifle and walked to the firing line. The laughter faltered into whispers. She didn't bring a bipod, no sleek gadgetry. She dropped to the dirt, the movement fluid, practiced. From her pouch she drew a small canvas bag filled with sand, tucking it under the stock as a rear rest. No gadgets, no computers, just the rifle, the wind, and her breath. She closed her eyes, felt the gust on her cheek, watched the flag across the valley, flipped through her worn notebook. One adjustment to the turret, nothing more. Target up, Sector 2, 1,510 yards. A silhouette rose. 4 seconds to shoot. Her breathing slowed. Her focus narrowed until the world shrank to the reticle and the target. At the bottom of her exhale, she pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked, a lighter sound than the others. The recoil absorbed, smooth, seamless. Silence followed, then ping. The sound carried across the valley, faint but unmistakable. Steel. Hit. Gasps broke the silence. The spotter called it in, voice shaking. "Hit confirmed, center mass." For a moment no one moved. Hayes's jaw hung slack. Thorne's grin evaporated. The sniper team stared, their disbelief painted across their faces. One shot in impossible wind from a rifle they'd mocked. Alad didn't celebrate, she didn't even look up. She worked the bolt, chambering another round, her expression unreadable, waiting. The whispers began, not mockery now, curiosity, awe. How did she see the wind? How did she calculate with no device, no team, no help? How did that broken rifle strike where their perfect ones had failed? The answer was one they couldn't imagine. Hayes forced words through clenched teeth. "A fluke, a lucky gust, anyone can get lucky once." His eyes burned into her. He couldn't allow this to stand. His authority, his pride, demanded control. He gestured to the far ridge where a small glint caught the sun. "You see that marker?" The range officer confirmed it, voice hushed. 2,000 yards. The words rippled like shockwaves. 2,000 yards, over a mile, in shifting winds. Hitting that target wasn't skill, it was myth. "No one on this base can hit it," Hayes said coldly. "Not my best men, not on their best day." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "You want me to believe that wasn't luck? Hit it 10 times, 10 in a row." A cruel challenge, a demand for the impossible. The sniper team shook their heads. Even one hit would be extraordinary. 10. Insane. The bullet would be in the air more than 3 seconds, a prisoner to every whisper of the wind. The odds were non-existent. But Alad didn't flinch. She shifted her body slightly, pulled her sandbag into place. From her pouch she drew not standard rounds but hand-loaded cartridges. Longer, heavier, crafted by her own hands. She laid them out carefully, reverently. She opened her notebook, traced a line with her finger, then began turning the turrets. Clicks echoed in the silence. Elevation, windage, tiny, precise adjustments. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't gambling. She was listening. The range held its breath. Soldiers leaned forward. Even the general's expression changed, curiosity shading into something sharper. On the ground, Ala was deaf to it all. She had heard the challenge. She had accepted it, not to prove Hayes wrong, not to humiliate anyone, but because silence only carried so far. Sometimes proof had to be given. The rifle settled into her shoulder. Her heartbeat slowed. She chambered the first round. The moment had come, and the world would never look at her rifle or her the same way again. How many lives could change in 3.5 seconds? That was the time it took a bullet to travel 2,000 yards. A breath held, a heartbeat stilled, a whisper of wind shifting in ways no scope could predict. That was the margin between miracle and failure, and that was what every soldier at the firing line now waited to see. Ala chambered her first round. The sound of the bolt sliding home was sharp, metallic, final. She adjusted her body into the dirt, cheek to stock, shoulder to rifle. Her pulse slowed. Her breathing dropped into rhythm, steady, even. Around her, the crowd was silent, no laughter, no muttering. Just the hum of disbelief pressing in on all sides. Colonel Hayes folded his arms, his jaw set, his eyes sharp with contempt he no longer fully believed. He had thrown down the challenge to humiliate her. Now he wasn't sure who was being tested. General Peters watched with quiet intensity, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze not on the rifle but on the woman. He had seen enough shooters in his career to know this was different. There was something in the stillness around her, in the gravity she carried without saying a word. The rifle cracked. The sound was lighter than the heavy .338s of the sniper team, but it carried with it a precision, a promise. The bullet leapt into the air, slicing across the valley, its flight unseen but felt in the long, agonizing silence that followed. 3.5 seconds stretched like an eternity. Then tink. A faint metallic ring echoed across the distance. The spotter's voice broke, high with disbelief. Hit, dead center, confirmed. Gasps rippled. Soldiers leaned forward. The impossible had been touched once. One hit. A fluke, Hayes's mind screamed. It had to be. Ala didn't move. Her hand worked the bolt with the grace of muscle memory. The spent casing spun into the dirt. A fresh round slid into the chamber. She made a single adjustment, one click to the windage turret. Second shot, the world held its breath again. Crack, silence, tink. The spotter's voice came louder this time, steadier. Hit, confirmed. A murmur swelled across the line, 2 in a row. Fluke was slipping into pattern. Third round, crack, tink. Fourth, crack, tink. By the fifth, no one dared speak. The valley was silent, as if the earth itself was listening. Each shot became ritual, chamber, breath, release. A line drawn between 2 points in space with absolute certainty. Hayes's arms dropped. His face was pale, his eyes locked on her, struggling to reconcile the truth unraveling before him. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chance. This was mastery. The sniper team, Davis, Jensen, all of them, stared not with contempt now, but with reverence. They were students watching a masterclass, their arrogance stripped bare. They saw every flaw in themselves reflected in her perfection. Crack, sixth tink. Seventh tink. Eighth tink. Every shot was a note in a symphony, the bolt sliding, the trigger breaking, the steel answering. Soldiers began to shift unconsciously, their bodies leaning with her, breathing with her. They weren't watching a demonstration anymore. They were witnessing something primal, something rare, the fusion of human will and machine, discipline and instinct, silence and power. Ninth shot, crack, tink. Only one remained. The crowd's collective breath hung in the hot air, their hearts pounding in rhythm with hers. The valley wind picked up suddenly, violent, swirling dust into small cyclones. Any other shooter would have panicked, rushed, or cursed. Ala didn't flinch. She waited, still, silent, patient. She let the gusts rage, let them pass, let the world return to its rhythm. Then she exhaled, slow, steady, crack. The long wait, the impossible stretch of seconds, then tink. 10. The line erupted in gasps, shouts, stunned laughter that wasn't mockery but release. Every single soldier, from the lowest private to the general, stared at her as if she had pulled the moon from the sky. Alas slid the bolt back, cleared the chamber, and set her rifle down. She rose slowly, calmly, brushing dust from her sleeves. Her expression was unchanged. No smile, no pride, just stillness. Colonel Hayes walked toward her, not with arrogance, not with command, but with something heavier. He stopped in front of her, his mouth half open, no words forming. Finally, he raised his hand and gave a sharp, perfect salute. It was not duty, it was not formality, it was respect. For a moment the firing line froze. Then Sergeant Davis snapped to attention. The sniper team followed. Thorne, pale-faced, raised his hand too. One by one, the entire line of soldiers saluted her, a wave of silent acknowledgement cresting across the range. Allah returned the colonel's salute, crisp and formal, her face unreadable. The debt of disrespect had been paid. But as the soldiers lowered their arms, General Peters's aide approached Hayes, slipping a tablet into his hand. "Sir," the captain whispered, "the specialist's file. Command authorized a full read." Hayes glanced down. What he saw drained the blood from his face. A name. A call sign whispered in intelligence briefings with awe and fear alike. Ghost. Operations that didn't exist on paper. Missions executed from ranges so far they defied mathematics. Confirmations so sensitive they were sealed above his clearance. The woman standing before him wasn't a janitor. She wasn't a misfit. She was the most successful operative in a program so shadowed it was considered myth. And the rifle he had mocked as scrap, it had a name of its own. The Scythe. 15 years of refinement. Every scar, every scratch purposeful. A masterpiece disguised as junk. Hayes's hand trembled slightly as he lowered the tablet. He looked at her again, truly looked. He had dismissed her as broken, useless. Now he saw the truth, a legend hiding in plain sight, her silence mistaken for weakness. On the line, soldiers still whispered, their voices carrying awe. "She's not human," one muttered. "No one can shoot like that." Another shook his head. "Not no one, just her." Allah heard none of it. She walked past them, rifle cradled loosely, her steps unhurried. She didn't bask in their awe, she didn't need it. For her, the shots weren't for them. They were for herself. A reminder of what she could still do, a reminder of who she had once been. But the cost of that memory pressed on her chest. She hadn't wanted to show them. She had wanted only silence, anonymity, the comfort of being unseen. Now the curtain had been pulled. Her legend had slipped into the light again, and legends never stayed hidden for long. That night whispers spread through FOB Kestrel like fire. The range witch, the ghost, the woman with the broken rifle who had made the impossible real. Stories grew in the retelling, each one painting her larger, sharper, more myth than flesh. Alas sat alone in the armory, her rifle disassembled across an oil-stained cloth. Each piece cleaned with careful hands, each scar examined like an old wound. It wasn't a weapon to her. It was part of her, carrying memories of mountain peaks, nights without end, missions balanced on a single breath. She touched the stock, her thumb running over its rough surface. People thought scars weakened things. She knew better. Scars were proof of survival. As the base outside buzzed with her name, she sat in silence, piecing herself back together the same way she pieced the rifle. Slowly, patiently, alone. Because deep down, she knew something the others didn't. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Why did victory feel like exposure? That was the question sitting heavy in Allah's chest as night settled over FOB Kestrel. By any measure, what she had done was beyond remarkable. 10 hits at 2,000 yards. Perfect. Flawless. A feat so impossible it already belonged more to legend than to record. And yet, instead of triumph, all she felt was unease. Around the base, the whispers spread like sparks in dry grass. In the mess hall, soldiers leaned close, retelling every detail of the shot, their voices half in awe, half in disbelief. In the barracks, the laughter that had once mocked her rifle was gone, replaced by hushed reverence, as if her presence demanded silence. In the motor pool, mechanics who hadn't even been at the range repeated the story as though they had seen it with their own eyes. The myth of the ghost was already being born. But alas stayed away. She wasn't in the mess, wasn't basking in their words. She sat in the armory alone, her rifle laid out across the cloth like bones waiting to be reassembled. Piece by piece she cleaned it, each motion deliberate, ritualistic. The scarred stock, the barrel worn silver gray, the mismatched rings on the scope. Every part carried memory, every part carried weight. It wasn't pride she felt as her hands worked, but something closer to grief. She hadn't wanted to remind herself what she was capable of. She hadn't wanted to remind anyone else either. Silence had been her shield, anonymity her refuge. But now the quiet was gone, shattered by the ringing of steel across a valley. The door creaked open. Corporal Thorne stood there, silhouetted by the dim yellow glow of a floodlight outside. In his hands was a tray, a steaming plate of food and a canteen of fresh water. He hesitated, his usual smirk gone, replaced by uncertainty. He stepped inside, set the tray gently on a workbench and looked at her. He didn't speak, didn't apologize, just gave a small nod, subtle but real. Then he turned and left. Ala watched him go, her hands still, the smell of gun oil heavy in the air. She returned her attention to the scope, polishing the lens with a soft cloth until it caught the light. Respect once withheld had been returned, but it felt hollow. Because she knew the truth, respect never came without cost. Elsewhere, Colonel Hayes sat alone in his quarters, the tablet still in his hands. Her file glowed on the screen, redactions lifted just enough for him to glimpse the outline of her past. Operation Spectre, Ghost Program, Alpha Asset, words that read like legend but felt like indictment. Missions whispered about in war rooms, numbers that defied comprehension. He remembered his own words: abomination, embarrassment, calibrated with a hammer and a prayer. He had taken a master and handed her a broom. The shame coiled in his gut like a living thing. He told himself he couldn't have known, but deep down he knew better. He had seen something in her stillness from the start, but he'd chosen not to look closely. He'd chosen uniformity over understanding. And now, standing at the edge of revelation, he felt small. The general had seen it too. Peters had watched her with an expression Hayes couldn't read, a faint smile playing at his lips as though the impossible didn't surprise him, as though he had expected it. When he left the range, he said nothing more than, "Keep her close, Colonel." But the weight in his voice said the opposite. She will not remain here in silence for long. The soldiers didn't see the danger in it yet. For them, it was story, myth, inspiration. For Hayes, it was a warning. Legends attracted attention, and attention drew orders. The kind that dragged ghosts back into wars they no longer wanted to fight. The next morning, Ala walked the range again, sweeping brass as though nothing had changed. Soldiers gave her space now, their conversations quieting when she passed. Their eyes lingered, not mocking, not pitying, but wary, respectful, curious, some even afraid. She felt the distance. Respect was colder than mockery. Mockery ignored you. Respect demanded you stay exactly where they had placed you, above them, untouchable, no longer human. She had lived that before. She had walked that path, and she had buried it for a reason. As the sun climbed, Sergeant Davis approached. His arrogance was gone. He walked slower, humbler, his rifle slung carelessly at his side. He stopped near her, shifting awkwardly. "Specialist," he said, his voice low. "I don't know what to say. I thought I knew this craft. I thought I was good. Yesterday proved otherwise." He looked at her, searching for something in her eyes. "How do you see it? The wind, the mirage, all of it." Ala paused, leaning on her broom. She studied him. For a moment she almost answered, almost told him about the long nights, the years of study, the thousands of shots taken in silence. But she didn't. She simply said, "You don't fight it, you listen." Davis nodded slowly, as if the words carried more than they revealed. He walked away, his shoulders heavier. He understood just enough to know he didn't understand. That night Hayes summoned her. She stood in his office, rigid, silent, her rifle slung across her back. He looked at her for a long time before speaking. "I read your file," he said finally. Her jaw tightened. Her silence was answer enough. "You didn't come here because you were unfit. You came here to disappear." His eyes flicked to the rifle, "And I nearly destroyed that." Alas said nothing. Hayes leaned forward. "They'll come for you, sooner or later. After what you did out there, they'll want you back in the fight, but I can see it in you, you don't want it anymore." He paused. "Am I right?" Her gaze was steady. "I've done enough." The words hung between them, simple, final. Hayes nodded, the lines of his face deeper than before. "Then let me protect what's left of your silence, for as long as I can." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. As Allah left the office, the base seemed quieter than usual. The soldiers had stopped whispering now, their reverence settling into something more dangerous: expectation. Once a legend stepped from the shadows, people demanded it walk among them. She returned to her bunk, her rifle case resting against the wall. She opened her small notebook and flipped to a blank page. For a long time she stared at it, pen in hand, but no numbers came. No wind speeds, no pressure readings. Only silence. Because deep inside she felt it again. The same stirring she had tried to bury when she'd asked for reassignment. The same restlessness that had haunted her nights in recovery. The truth she couldn't escape, no matter how far she ran, no matter how long she stayed silent. Ghosts were never allowed to rest. And sooner than she wanted, the world would come calling. What did it mean when a legend stirred? For Allah, it meant the silence she had fought so hard to protect was now slipping away, thread by thread, unraveling with every whisper carried down the line of FOB Kestrel. By the third day after the shots, the story had traveled farther than the valley. A convoy from another forward base arrived for resupply, and their soldiers already knew. They asked questions, their voices eager, almost desperate. Was it true? 10 shots at 2,000 yards. With a broken rifle. They looked for her, but alas stayed hidden, slipping between shadows, avoiding the mess hall, eating alone. But stories were hungry things. They grew in the telling, and this one was already leaving the base behind. Colonel Hayes knew it. He sat in his office late at night, the desert wind rattling the tin roof, staring at reports he didn't want to read. The whispers had reached division command. Higher headquarters wanted details, a performance review, a polite phrase masking something sharper: interest. He thought of the general's quiet words, "Keep her close," and felt the unease crawling up his spine. Allah, meanwhile, kept to her rituals. She swept brass, patched targets, reset plates. At night she disassembled the rifle, the scythe, laying out its pieces like old memories. The soldiers no longer mocked her. They gave her space. But respect had turned into distance. They didn't treat her as one of them. They treated her as something other. And yet there was something softer in the air too. Corporal Thorne had stopped smirking. When he passed her on the range, his eyes held no ridicule, just quiet acknowledgement. Once, he even helped her lift a heavy steel plate without being asked. He didn't speak, but the gesture was its own apology. But Allah felt none of the comfort others might have found in that shift. She felt only the weight of being seen. Legends didn't belong in the light. Legends belonged to shadows where silence could shield them. And she knew in her bones shadows didn't last forever. The confirmation came one evening in the mess. She wasn't there, but she heard about it the next morning. 2 officers in unfamiliar patches, their insignia blacked out, had arrived with the supply convoy. They asked questions quietly, careful not to draw notice. But soldiers talked. Word spread that they had asked specifically about a specialist named Vance, about her rifle, about her past units. When Hayes heard, his stomach sank. When Allah heard, she only nodded once, as though she had expected it. Later that day, Hayes found her at the range. She was sitting alone on the berm, her notebook open, staring at the mirage lines twisting above the dirt. He stood for a moment, not sure how to begin. "They're asking about you," he said finally. "I know. You're not surprised." Her eyes stayed on the horizon. Ghosts don't stay buried, not forever. He hesitated. "Do you want me to push back, to say nothing happened here, to make this disappear?" She closed the notebook, her hands resting on it. "It won't matter. If they've decided to remember me, they'll find me." There was no fear in her voice, no defiance either, just fact. Hayes looked at her rifle leaning against the wall of the shack. He thought about the first time he had seen it, the disgust that had risen in him. Now, looking again, he felt only respect. No reverence. Every scar told a story he would never fully know. He sighed, "Then I'll do what I can to slow it down." Alag glanced at him, her eyes unreadable. "You don't owe me that." "Yes, I do." His voice was quiet but certain. "I dismissed you. I humiliated you. I tried to break you because I couldn't understand you. That's on me." She didn't answer, but there was a flicker in her gaze, something softer, almost human, behind the stillness. That night's sleep didn't come easily. The base was quieter than usual, the air heavy, thick with tension. And then, just past midnight, the silence broke. A single shot cracked in the distance, not on the range, not a drill, real, the kind of sound every soldier knew in their marrow. Then another. The alarm followed, sirens tearing through the night, boots pounding on gravel. FOB Kestrel was under attack. Mortar rounds landed outside the perimeter, shaking the walls, throwing dust from the ceiling. The guards on the towers shouted into the darkness, their rifles spitting tracers into the void. The insurgents were testing the wire, probing, forcing chaos. Alag grabbed her rifle case. She moved without hesitation, her body remembering rhythms she hadn't wanted to feel again. Soldiers rushed around her, some panicked, others shouting orders. She moved through them like water, silent, controlled. On the outer berm, Davis and his sniper team scrambled to set up. Their eyes were wide, their movements frantic. The wind was wrong, the night thick with dust and smoke. Their expensive scopes saw nothing but distortion. And then a silhouette, a flash on the ridge just beyond the wire, a glint of glass, a sniper waiting, hunting. One shot had already dropped a tower guard. Another could follow at any second. Davis cursed, "I can't get him, Mirage is too heavy." A lad dropped prone beside them. She slid the scythe from its case, the pieces fitting together in seconds. The bolt slid home. She didn't need a word, didn't need permission. Her cheek met the stock, her eye the scope. She breathed once, felt the wind shift against her cheek, saw the pattern of dust in the moonlight. Crack! The shot cut the night in half. A moment later, a shape slumped on the ridge, silent, final. The tower guard lived. The line held. And in that moment, every soldier who had doubted her, every soldier who had mocked her rifle, her silence, her exile, knew. She wasn't a myth. She wasn't a story. She was here, real, necessary. But as the sirens faded and the firefight ebbed, Alas stayed prone in the dirt longer than she needed to, because she knew what that shot meant. It wasn't just defense. It was revelation. Someone out there had seen her. Someone would report it. And the story would grow again, bigger, louder, until there was no silence left to hide in. She rose slowly, slinging the rifle across her back. Around her, soldiers murmured her name, not in mockery now, not even in awe, but in something closer to fear. The ghost had returned, and the world would come looking. Why did saving lives feel like losing herself? That thought pressed in on Alah the morning after the attack. The valley was still heavy with smoke, the acrid tang of gunpowder clinging to the air. Soldiers worked quietly, repairing damage, replacing concertina wire, collecting shell casings from the dirt. The base had held, but something deeper had shifted. Everywhere she went, eyes followed her. Not mocking now, not dismissive, but watchful, reverent. A silence moved with her like a shadow cast long and wide. When she walked into the mess hall, conversation slowed. Forks hesitated halfway to mouths. Soldiers nodded, some awkwardly, some with almost religious seriousness. To them, she was a Lavance anymore. She was the ghost who had dropped a sniper through smoke and mirage at midnight. But Alad didn't feel like a ghost. She felt tired. She hadn't wanted to pull that trigger, hadn't wanted to be seen through the scope of her rifle again. But necessity had demanded it, and she had answered, and in doing so, she had given herself away. Colonel Hayes knew it too. He stood on the catwalk above the motor pool that morning, watching her cross the yard. His respect had deepened into something heavier, guilt, admiration, fear, all tangled into one. He remembered the first time he'd seen her rifle and dismissed it. Now he knew better. The scythe wasn't broken. It wasn't junk. It was the sharpest edge he had ever witnessed. And she, the woman wielding it, was sharper still. But he also knew what sharp edges drew, hands that wanted to wield them. By noon, confirmation arrived. 2 blacked-out SUVs rolled through the gates, their windows tinted, their plates unmarked. Soldiers watched as 3 men in plain clothes stepped out, their hair cropped short, their posture unmistakably military. They moved with the precision of people who belonged to no unit on paper. The base grew quiet. Even before introductions, everyone knew. These were not men who came for resupply or inspection. They came for one reason. They asked for Specialist Vance. Alaa was in the armory when Hayes found her. She had the rifle spread across the cloth again, hands moving slow, steady, the ritual grounding her. He hesitated before speaking. "They're here," he said softly. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "I know. You don't have to." Her eyes cut to him, calm but sharp. "Yes, I do." There was no fight in her voice, no anger, just inevitability. When she stepped into the sunlight, the plainclothes men turned as one. Their gazes were sharp, appraising, not curious, not awed. They already knew. The oldest of them, a man with lines carved deep into his face, stepped forward. "Specialist Vance," he said, though his tone made it clear he knew that wasn't the name that mattered. "We've been looking for you." The soldiers of FOB Kestrel gathered at a distance, watching, their whispers carried on the hot wind. For them, this was confirmation. The myth wasn't just myth, it was real, and someone far above them had come to claim it. General Peters arrived then, his presence quiet but commanding. He exchanged brief words with the men, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Alaa. "You don't have to answer me now," he said. "But know this, what you did yesterday, what you've done before, the world doesn't forget. And when the world remembers, it doesn't ask, it demands." She studied him, her face still. "I asked for silence." "And I granted it," Peters said evenly. "But silence is fragile, and last night it broke." The words landed heavy. She thought of the sniper on the ridge, the flash of glass, the body slumping. She thought of the soldiers who lived because she pulled the trigger. And she thought of the soldiers staring at her now, their eyes filled with something she had tried so hard to avoid: belief. That evening the base was restless. Stories spread faster than orders. The soldiers didn't just talk about the attack, they talked about her. The way she had dropped the sniper with one shot. The way she had moved calm, unshaken, while everyone else scrambled. They spoke of her like a shield, a talisman, something greater than flesh and bone. And a laugh felt it closing in. Respect was colder than ridicule. It didn't let you breathe. It didn't let you disappear. It made you a symbol, and symbols didn't get to choose. She returned to the armory, seeking the quiet she could still claim. She laid out the rifle, the scythe, and touched each piece as though it anchored her. The scarred stock, the roughened grip, the barrel silvered with wear. The world saw broken parts held together. She saw balance, years of refinement, survival etched into steel. Corporal Thorne appeared in the doorway again, hesitant. This time he didn't bring food. He just leaned against the frame, arms crossed, his usual arrogance stripped away. "You saved us last night," he said quietly, "all of us." She kept working, her hands steady. "I used to laugh at that rifle," he went on. "At you, thought you were a joke, I was wrong." He swallowed. "I just wanted you to know." For the first time she looked up, her eyes meeting his. She didn't smile, didn't soften, but she gave the smallest nod. And Thorne, understanding that was all he would ever get, turned and left. Later, when the base finally settled into uneasy quiet, Alas sat with the rifle assembled again, resting across her knees. She thought of the night shot, of the whispers, of the plainclothes men who had come asking. She thought of the word Hayes had whispered to her in his office. Legend. She hated the word. Legends weren't human. Legends didn't bleed. Legends didn't get to rest. And yet, as she traced her fingers across the rough stock, she knew something she hadn't admitted aloud. She was tired of being silent, tired of sweeping brass while the world pretended she didn't exist. The rifle wasn't broken, and neither was she. But the cost of being seen was steep. She had paid it before, and she feared what it would demand this time. Somewhere beyond the wire, in the ridges and valleys she had studied so carefully, she felt the shape of something moving. The attack hadn't been random. It had been a probe, a test. They had been searching for weakness. And last night, in one shot, she had told them exactly where to aim. The world would come looking. Enemies, allies, command, ghosts called to ghosts. And Alan knew the silence she had built at FOB Kestrel was already gone. How much warning does a storm give before it breaks? At FOB Kestrel, the answer came just before dawn. The first sound was distant, a low thump that rolled through the valley like thunder. Mortars. Then the sky cracked open. The perimeter lit in flashes, sirens wailed, boots pounded the dirt. Soldiers scrambled to positions, shouts mixing with explosions. The attack wasn't a probing strike this time. It was a hammer. Colonel Hayes was already on the command net, his voice clipped, calm only on the surface. Reports flooded in heavy fire from the eastern ridge, small arms probing from the south, possible sappers moving through the wadis. This was coordinated, planned, precise. Not harassment, not a test. They had come to break the base. Ala was on the range berm when the first rounds landed, her body low to the ground before instinct even caught up. Dust rained down. Soldiers rushed past, their faces pale, eyes wide. She saw fear there, but she also saw something else. They looked at her differently now, expectant, as though the impossible shot at 2,000 yards had made her more than human, as though she could hold the storm back with nothing but her rifle. And she hated it. She had wanted silence, not this, but the silence was gone. The sniper fire came next. Sharp, precise cracks from the ridgeline, rounds snapping into the guard towers. One soldier fell, then another. Panic rippled across the line. Sergeant Davis tried to get his team into position, but the mirage was thick, the wind treacherous, the chaos overwhelming. Their high-dollar optics saw nothing but distortion. Hayes's voice cut through the radio net. "We need those shooters taken out now." Davis froze. He knew he couldn't. Not in this wind, not with his hands trembling. He looked sideways at Ala, prone already, the scythe stretched before her. Her cheek pressed to the scarred stock, her eyes steady behind the glass. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait for orders. She simply chambered a round. The shot cracked. A faint tink echoed seconds later, one sniper down. Another silhouette flashed, she adjusted, fired, dropped it. Then another. Then another. The ridge grew silent in seconds, the storm broken at its edges by her calm, deliberate rhythm. The base held its breath. But the fight wasn't over. From the south came movement, shapes in the dust, insurgents weaving through the wire, cutting gaps, rushing low and fast. Machine guns opened up, tracers tearing the night, but still they came. A wave, too many. Hayes's orders rattled through the net, but the soldiers on the line faltered. Fear bit hard. And then a voice rose, not Hayes, not Davis. A younger soldier, one of the privates who had mocked her rifle days earlier. "Follow the ghost," he shouted, eyes fixed on Ala. And something shifted. It wasn't official. It wasn't command, but it spread. Soldiers steadied. Their fire found rhythm again. They fought harder not because of rank, not because of Hayes's voice in their ear, but because the quiet woman with the broken rifle was prone in the dirt beside them, calm as stone, answering the storm one shot at a time. Alaf felt it like weight pressing in. She hadn't asked for this, she didn't want it. But in the chaos and the breaking of the night, they had made her into something more than flesh. A shield, a symbol, a ghost. Through the scope she caught a flash, a heavier weapon on the ridge, a tripod settling, the long barrel of a recoilless rifle being aimed toward the perimeter. One shot from it would tear a hole wide enough for the assault to pour through. She closed her eyes for half a second, listened to the wind, felt the earth breathe. When she opened them, the reticle settled on the shape through the haze. Crack! 3.5 seconds later, the weapon clattered useless to the ground. Its crew slumped over it. The soldiers on the line saw it. Their cheer rose above the chaos, ragged but fierce. The storm bent but didn't break them. Not yet. The battle dragged on. Minutes stretched like hours. Bullets tore the air, mortars shook the earth, voices shouted and cracked. Through it all, Alas stayed steady, each shot precise, each movement measured. Her notebook's years of numbers lived in her hands now, guiding every breath, every squeeze of the trigger. But the truth pressed deeper with each round. She couldn't save them all. No rifle, no matter how perfect, could hold back an army forever. By dawn, the insurgents fell back, their attack broken. Bodies littered the ridge, the wadis, the wire. The base still stood, scarred but unbroken. The soldiers stood too, shaking, exhausted but alive. And every single one of them knew why. When the sun crested the horizon, Colonel Hayes walked the line. His face was lined, his eyes hollow, but his posture was steady. He stopped where Alas still lay prone, the scythe across her arms, her body coated in dust. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, so only she could hear, "They'll never forget this." She didn't look at him. "Neither will I." The words carried weight he couldn't fully understand, because for Alas, each shot wasn't just a defense of the base. Each shot was a piece of her silence breaking apart. Each shot pulled her further back into the light, further from the anonymity she had fought to keep. As soldiers gathered water, bandaged wounds, and cleared wreckage, whispers spread again, louder than before. Not just about the shots at 2,000 yards, not just about the sniper in the night, but about the storm that had broken against the ghost. By the time dusk came again, the story was already larger than the truth. They said she had fired without missing once, that she could see through dust as though it were glass, that the wind itself bent for her. Myths grew fast in war, faster still when soldiers needed something to believe in. And Alas sat alone in the armory again, the rifle disassembled across her cloth, each piece cleaned with the same deliberate patience. Outside, her name grew louder. Inside, she sat with the silence that was slipping away, wondering how much of herself would be left when the world finished taking what it wanted. Because storms didn't just break against walls, they wore them down, and sooner or later the wall gave way. What remains after the storm passes? At FOB Kestrel it was silence, heavy, raw, filled with ghosts of what had almost been lost. The valley smelled of smoke and gunpowder. The wire was torn, the towers scarred, the earth pocked with craters. But the base still stood, and so did its soldiers. They gathered in small knots that morning, speaking in low tones, exhaustion etched deep in their faces. The battle had tested every one of them, pushed them past the edge of fear into something harder, sharper. And through it all, one figure stood at the center of every whisper. Alavance, the ghost with the broken rifle. She hated the name, not because it wasn't true, but because it was too true. Ghosts weren't flesh. Ghosts didn't feel the ache in their bones, the weight in their chest, the fatigue that made each step heavy. Ghosts didn't want rest, but she did. She sat in the armory again, the scythe laid out before her. Every piece cleaned, oiled, inspected, not out of ritual this time, but out of need, as if keeping her hands busy could keep her thoughts from spiraling. She remembered each shot, each body that had fallen, each soldier who had looked to her as if she were salvation itself. She remembered the weight of being seen, of being needed. And she hated it. The door creaked. Colonel Hayes stepped in, his uniform dust-stained, his face gaunt from sleepless hours. He stood quietly, watching her hands move over the rifle. "They're writing reports already," he said finally. "Command will want more. They'll ask for you, demand you. I can only hold them off for so long." A lad didn't look up. "I know." He hesitated, then moved closer. "I misjudged you, specialist. Worse than misjudged, I dismissed you. I won't make that mistake again." His voice softened. "But tell me, what do you want?" Her hands stilled. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but steady. "Silence. That's all I ever wanted." Hayes swallowed. "And if silence is possible?" She gave no answer. She didn't need to. Both of them knew the truth. Silence was gone. Later that day, General Peters returned. The battle had kept him at Kestrel, and now he walked the line, speaking quietly with soldiers, offering words of recognition. But when he reached Allah, he stopped. His eyes held none of the awe the others carried, only something sharper, understanding. "You didn't want this," he said quietly. "No. But you didn't hesitate when it came." She said nothing. He studied her rifle, then her face. "There are few who can do what you did, fewer still who can carry the weight of it. You've done both. The question now is not whether you can, it's whether you will again." Allah's jaw tightened. "I've given enough." Peters nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but the world doesn't measure enough. It only measures what's left to give." He turned then, leaving her with words that felt less like a warning and more like a sentence. That evening, as the sun sank red behind the ridges, the base gathered for roll call. Names were read, some absent forever, their silence honored with bowed heads. When it ended, something unexpected happened. It began with Sergeant Davis. He stepped forward, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on Allah. He raised his hand in a sharp salute, not to command, not to Hayes, to her. Others followed: Jensen, Thorne, the line of snipers, the riflemen, the mechanics, the cooks. One by one, every soldier raised their hand. A wave of salutes rolling through the crowd, not commanded, not ordered, chosen. Allah stood still, her face unreadable. Then slowly she raised her own hand, returning the gesture. The base fell into silence, the salute holding, carrying weight heavier than words. When at last the hands fell, Allah turned and walked away. Back to the armory, back to her quiet corner. The rifle waited for her there, disassembled again, its pieces gleaming faintly in the dim light. She sat, and for a long time she simply looked at it, not as a weapon, not as a legend, but as a mirror. Scarred, worn, functional, true, a tool shaped by survival like her. She picked up the cloth and began to clean, slow, steady. Not because she had to, but because it was all she knew to do when the weight grew too heavy. Outside, the whispers would continue, stories would spread, command would come. The world would remember the ghost with the broken rifle. But in that small, quiet armory, Allah reminded herself of something different. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a legend. She wasn't even a soldier anymore. She was a person, scarred, surviving. And sometimes survival was enough. The cloth moved across steel, gentle, precise. A final thought settled in her mind, clear as the ringing of steel on a distant ridge. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.